Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to LEOFF 2 Plan Board meeting. If everyone's ready, we're going to go ahead and get started. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment of silence to remember those who've passed since our last meeting. Thank you. So let's go ahead and take a look at the minutes from the last meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. So we'll move to our first agenda item. Oh, yes. Okay, can we have a vote? All in favor, say aye.
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 Sorry. Yep. Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
Okay. The next item up on the agenda is an overview of the contribution rate adoption process. By way of reminder for the board members, adopting contribution rates for LEOFF Plan 2 is one of the statutory duties of the board. This is a rate adoption year. Lisa from the State Actuary's Office is here to give you an overview of the process and how the actuary will be assisting the board in this adoption process between now and July. The vote to adopt rates is scheduled for July. And then with that, Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
There we go. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Lisa Wan with the Office of the State Actuary. And as Steve said, I am here today to talk about the contribution rate adoption process for you. And this presentation is strictly educational. Feel free to interrupt me and ask questions as I'm presenting. No decisions are required by the board today. I will go through some really high-level pension funding basics, just a couple of slides on that, then move into the purpose of contribution rates, followed by how they're developed, and then the process timeline and next steps. So first, starting with some pension funding basics. A pension plan is a contract to pay future benefits, but those future benefits or that obligation is unknown. So the LEOFF 2 board hires an actuary to estimate that future obligation, and the actuary uses several assumptions to estimate it, such as how much will salaries grow over the years, because your pension benefit is based on final average earnings. When will members of the plan retire? And then how long will they live to receive those benefits? That's just a real high-level summary of some of the key assumptions we use to estimate that future obligation. Now, in order to fund that obligation, LEOFF Plan 2 uses what we call systematic actuarial funding. And what that means is it's an amount calculated by an actuary, and it's systematically funded, or regular payments are made over time. And that pre-funding utilizes the power of investing, which we'll talk about a little bit in another slide. So in order to pre-fund...
Question.
David?
This one. So are there other ways that we would fund these things besides regular systematic payments? It would seem like that's kind of what we do.
That is what we do in the state of Washington, and there are other ways. For example, you could do pay-as-you-go funding, which means you're making contributions equal to the benefits that are being paid out. That would utilize zero investment, the power of investing. So yes, there are different ways to do it. So in order to pre-fund, some of the requirements are, one, a funding policy, because that defines how those costs are allocated over the time period, and then again, additional assumptions, for example, what is our assumed investment growth? And then also, how long do we expect members to work? What is their working lifetime? So those are some of the additional things that are required in order to determine this pre-funding. Now, some of the components required for pre-funding are actually in state law. So for all of the open plans in the state of Washington, state law defines the aggregate actuarial cost method to determine the allocation of the costs. Left two statutes go a little further and also state or another actuarial, a recognized actuarial cost method based on a level percentage of payroll. So that's the funding policy in statute. Some of the assumptions that are in statute are inflation at 3%, general salary growth, that's not including like step increases. So general salary growth is inflation plus 0.75. The investment return is adopted by the LEOFF Plan 2 board. So for all other Washington State retirement plans right now, the inflation investment return, is 7.7%, and that's in statute. LEOFF Plan 2 has adopted 7.5, which is the recommendation from our office. Then there's a whole bunch of demographic assumptions, which are things like mortality, retirement ages, termination rates, and those are developed by our office based on experience studies, which we've talked to the board about before. And then one more item that's required for pre-funding is assets. And in state law, it defines the use of the actuarial value of assets, which smooths any investment gains and losses over a period of up to 8 years, but also maintaining a 30% corridor or relationship to market value. And that just means the actuarial value must stay within 70 to 130% of the market value. So it's maintaining a relationship with market value, but it's smoothing those investment gains and losses to help with the volatility that occurs in the market. So contribution rates are the vehicle that are used to pre-fund this unknown future obligation. Both members and employers, and for left two, employers also include the state, make contributions into a pension trust fund over each member's working lifetime, and those contributions are based on a percent of members' pay. The contributions are then invested by the Washington State Investment Board as part of the commingled trust fund, and they grow with investment earnings. And the ultimate goal is that all those contributions plus the investment income at retirement for a member are equal to the cost of that member's future benefit payments. That's the goal. So by the time the person retires, the money that has accumulated from contributions and investment income will be equal to the value of all their future benefit payments. So this next chart just shows an estimate of the funding sources for this future obligation at retirement. So at retirement, a typical retirement plan that has used systematic actuarial funding and has had good investment earnings, solid investment earnings, the investment return portion of that total fund at retirement for a typical retirement plan ranges anywhere from 65 to 80%. So the investment income portion of that total pot of money at retirement can comprise, on average 75% for a plan. So that shows you the power of that systematic actuarial funding and being able to utilize the power of investing. The other two components of the full pie, the full pot of money at retirement, come from the contributions from members and employers. And what I like about this chart is it does also show that if your investment earnings are less than what you anticipated, that part of the pie starts to shrink, and the way you make the pie whole is by increasing contributions. So how are contribution rates calculated? As Steve already mentioned, this is a rate-setting year. So in every even-numbered year, contribution rates are adopted, and they are based on an odd-numbered year valuation. So this year, 2016, our office will be presenting contribution rates to the board based on the 2015 actuarial valuation results. So in order to develop those contributions, an actuary calculates three items. The value, today's value of that unknown future obligation. We call that the present value of future benefits, or PVFB for short. I needed those short for this example. And then we also calculate the actuarial value of assets. As I mentioned, that's in statute, the actuarial value of assets. So we don't use the market value, we use the actuarial value, or that smoothed value. Call that the AVA. And we also calculate today's value of expected future salaries, because contributions are a percent of salary. And that's the present value of future salaries. So our contribution rate calculation is today's value of the future obligation minus the assets that have been accrued to date that are in the plan, which leaves you with the unfunded future benefits. You divide that by the present value of all salaries to figure out what that rate is over a member's working lifetime. So that's the contribution rate calculation, and those are the items that go into that calculation, and then we present that to the board, and we present contribution rates to you. We will be doing that next month based on past practices and policies that have been adopted by the board. And some of those practices and policies include, so as I mentioned earlier, the aggregate funding method is in statute, but LEOFF 2 statutes also open the door for another recognized method. But at this time, it's the aggregate funding method, so we will calculate the contribution rates using that cost method. Then in 2004, the board identified contribution rate stability as one of its top strategic priorities. And in order to accomplish the contribution rate stability, the board adopted minimum contribution rates based on another funding method, the entry age normal cost method. And in 2004, at that time, the board adopted 90% of the normal cost under that funding method as your minimum rates. And that 90% was, at that time, to take effect July 1st, 2009. Then in 2008, when the board was presented with contribution rates and was making a contribution rate adoption decision, the board decided to move to 100%. So, in effect, the 90% never actually came into play. It was adopted, but rates have not been adopted at the 90%. They were adopted at 100%. And the board has maintained mostly the 100% going forward. There have been some other decisions that kept rates stable or equal to the prior rates, but regardless, the rates have always remained between 90% and 100% since July 1st, 2009. And currently, the board has adopted rates through 2017-19, so when we do present to you next month, really the decision is, do we want to do something different than what we've adopted at this point? So this next graph gives an example of historical member. These are the member contribution rates for LEOFF Plan 2. And I wanted to show this. Is there a question? Okay. And I wanted to show this because it helps tell the story of the rate stability decision of the board. So we start back in 2006. I believe it was 7.79 was the rate, just under 7.8. And this is a period where the board was stepping into the full required contributions of the plan. And so 2006, July 1st, 2006 was the second step of that rate phase-in. It's a 4-year phase-in, and you can see the different steps on this graph. In addition, there are some changes in rates, and I'm going to talk about those in the next slide, that occur because of benefit improvements. So, and those come through as supplemental rates, and I'll talk about that. But you can see the small little changes between different rate setting periods. And then in July 1st, 2009, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that's where the funding policy came into play with the 100% normal cost under the entry age normal cost method. And you can see the stability of the rates since July 1st, 2009. So in addition to the rate setting process that takes place in even numbered years, supplemental rates can also be adopted by the board in the off cycle. And the purpose of supplemental rates, they're temporary contribution rates that are used to fund benefit improvements that are not yet in your basic rates that you adopted in the even years. So, for example, in the 2006 legislative session, there were 3 benefit improvements that were adopted, and the total of those 3 benefit improvements was 6 basis points, or 0.06% increase to the member rates. And because you already had rates adopted that didn't include those benefit improvements, the board wanted to fund those. And so starting on September 1st, 2006, an additional supplemental rate was added to your contribution rates to fund those benefit improvements until the next rate setting cycle when they would be included in your basic rates. So that's the purpose of supplemental rates. I've listed the other 2 periods of supplemental rates that were adopted by the board that were included in the prior slide, and a little bit of detail behind those rates. So here's the process timeline for the board. Today, having your educational background just to get you ready for next month, when our office will be presenting to you the preliminary results of our 2015 actuarial evaluation, and that will include also seeing the funded status of the plan and other details. I know the board is always interested in how the assets, the actuarial value of assets are developing, and also just general data about the membership of LEOFF Plan 2. So we will be presenting that to you next month along with the resulting contribution rates. You'll also be receiving a presentation from Milliman, which is the outside actuarial firm that has been hired to audit our work. So every 2 years, when our office is preparing the actuarial evaluation that is used to set contribution rates for LEOFF Plan 2 and all the other Washington State retirement plans, our work is audited by an outside actuary. So you will be hearing from them next month as well. And then July is the month that the board will actually adopt the rates. So education today, hearing the preliminary information next month, and then adopting the following month. And during this period, we are working, we actually have completed the contribution rates, and those preliminary results should be up on our web by the end of May. So you'll be able to actually see the rates. So that's where we're at in our process, and the outside actuary Milliman is doing an audit at this time. So it's a concurrent audit. We're working with them. They're asking questions about our data, and so that we'll both be prepared for next month to come and present to you. So as I mentioned, that concurrent audit is going on right now. We'll finalize our results and present it to the board next month. Milliman will also present their results. The rate adoption occurs in July, and the rates that the board will be considering for adoption will be effective July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2019. Of course, subject to revision by the legislature, and then also potential other supplemental rate changes could come in if there are other benefit improvements, but those are also presented to the board for decisions. And that completes my background on the contribution rate process. I'd be happy to take any other questions.
David?
Go, David.
Quick question. You said that the preliminary results for these rates will be ready by the end of this month?
Correct. Yes, we've completed them. We're just preparing. They could be up as of yesterday. I haven't checked our website, but our goal is to have them up by the end of May.
Okay.
Yes, we're trying to move this process as early as we can. So this is the earliest we've had our rates on the web.
That'd be great. I would request if Mr. Nelson or the board could send those out to us. I'd love to be able to see those and see how they reflect what we've already made a basis for the 17-19. See if that's going to change much of what we'll be talking about in June.
Yeah, no, spoiler alert, but just as a rough, perhaps, idea, is the level of, how does the level of expected rate change for Left 2 maybe compared to other plans such as PERS?
Well, PERS is...
Or...
Compare is an interesting word. PERS is, so the other state retirement plans are still stepping into the mortality improvement, the cost of funding mortality improvement. So they adopted the new mortality improvement scale BB, which the board also has adopted, but they phased in funding it. So the cost of that was more than they could afford in one step. So they're still stepping into contribution rate increases to fund that. They also just took the next step down in the investment return assumptions, so they're now at 7.7 from 7.8. So they have things going on that are increasing their rates without what's happening with investment returns, which if you know, we had investment losses for this past year through 2015. So that also has an impact. And then we also have the compounding issue with PERS of the Plan 1 unfunded liability, which is also increasing. So definitely some significant increases in those plans. Left Plan 2, I believe your rate has come down, but where it lands, where your current rates that you have adopted, I believe, still fall between 90 and 100% of the entry age of our new calculation. But I'd also be happy to send you, Steve, the link to that so you could share it with the board members.
Thank you. Would that be helpful if you got the PERS stuff as well as Left?
Well, I already, I'm familiar with the PERS information.
Okay.
So
all right. I'll leave that then.
We're budgeting for our 17-18 budget with those higher rates.
Okay.
Then Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa, I saw on your slide that I think it was in the 2009 when Fish and Wildlife was added to LEOFF,
Yes.
that drove a rate increase. Can you kind of, I guess, briefly explain that?
Yes, so that was, the 2009 legislative session. It was just 1 basis point member increase. And I believe, Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that came from a group of members from Fish and Wildlife enforcement officers became members of Left Plan 2, and I believe it was for all service, including their past service, and so that's where you can have a rate increase. Is that correct, Steve? It's all
Yes.
service?
Yeah. They had the option to transfer over some of that past service, and the costs didn't quite cover the costs of the value of that service in Left. One small note too. Just as board members know, you adopt the rates. There are two different pieces of statute regarding the legislature's ability to revise those rates. When the board was created, the authority to adopt rates was given solely to the board. The next year after the board was created, there was a separate piece of legislation that provided the legislature with the authority to revise those rates. The enforceability of that subsequent legislation has never been tested in court, and it's, I know for many of you that's a subject of some strong opinions, and I only mention it because this is a rate adoption year, and historically, when there's been tension about whether or not the legislature will fully fund the left two rates adopted by the board, it peaks in years where the legislature is adopting contribution rates. The legislature has always fully funded the rates adopted by the left two board. However, there have been proposals in the past in the House and in the Senate and from the governor's office with rates other than those adopted by the board. And that will obviously be an important issue this session, and with the budget discussions where they're at, there could be increased attention on all state expenses, including the rates for all the pension plans, including LEOFF. We'll keep you posted on that, but I just wanted to make that one point. David?
I just want to say that I just want to thank you very much for this. I think on page 8 where you do the member contribution rates, it would be nice because I know from Board Member Johnston and other ones who were here at the beginning, this has been really the pride of this board is going back to the beginning, before the board was created, when the board was created, and that stability and the ability to provide benefits and make these changes over time. And so it kind of does a little disservice to start at 2006, because I think it really want to start about, I would say 98, 99 maybe, is and to show how this has allowed us to provide one of the best funded pensions in this country. So
if you continued it back, legislative briefings have occurred on that for all the other plans. Historically, the member rate has been around that 8.5 mark back, and then it dipped precipitously beginning in about 2000 for all the plans. In Left Plan 2, the bottom of the rates were about 5.5% roughly, and the legislative staff referred to that dip as sort of the happy valley of contribution rates, followed immediately by what is referred to as Terror Mountain, as the rates now have been increasing back up to what are, for LEOFF anyway, simply the long-term numbers that the plan had always experienced. For the other plans, the peak coming out of it will be higher than the long-term historical costs, and a lot of that is due to the work that the board did early on, adopting a phase-in plan beginning in 2004 to get rates back up to the expected long-term cost of the plan, and then leveling them out. So your policy decisions, both in the phase-in of the rate increase was adopted for all the other plans subsequently by the legislature. They haven't quite figured out how to implement your rate stability proposals yet, but there is certainly a lot of interest and appreciation that when rates are rising for the other plans, they're not rising for Left 2.
DRS does also maintain list of the historical rates by plan on their website. I can also send you that link if you'd like to, and it will show just a table of all the historical rates. It's very informative.
I always find those things informative because those are my conversations I have with lots of different stakeholders about the value of the Left 2 board and those stable rates, because it is impacting all our other systems, be it PERS, TERS, or anything like that, that are seeing significant increases now because they haven't kept those stable rates and haven't been able to adopt those lower investment rates or the mortality rates, and that compounds it when the investments don't come in as well, too.
I think we have a future briefing scheduled, I believe, in June, doing a comparison. If it's not already part of that comparison, I think Ryan already planned on including that, but we'll make sure that that's a part of the comparison for you.
Mr. Director?
Chairman Fox?
Just, I knew you would appreciate this, but the Happy Valley was actually 4.39%.
Thank you for correcting my erroneous numbers.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, in PERS Plan 2, the plan that I was in at the time, the member rate dipped out almost at zero. It was less than 0.5%. So the underfunding that was taking place in Left Plan 2 was also going on in all the pension plans. Let's see. Are there other questions for Lisa?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for David. From an employer's perspective, sometimes it's not the amount of the rate that's at issue. It's the fluctuation in rates that you can't actually project or plan for. That's more the crisis. Is that correct?
Representative Hawley, you've exactly said what I was about to add in, but I thought I've already been speaking too much, is when those rates dropped in the PERS plan, many of my cohorts across the state of Washington said that is not a good budgeting tactic because we knew that they would be going back up. It's much easier to budget when they stay at 8%, and they're 8%. Stable rates keep budgets because 75% of our costs are salary and benefits. And you're exactly right. That fluctuation in PERS comes at the value of services to our residents. We would take it from somebody, somewhere in our budget. Stable rates help the public get good services.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Wong.
Okay, let me see. Tim, can you help me with the slides on this one? I don't have a clicker up here. The next item on the agenda is a draft merger study work plan. As you'll recall from the last meeting, there was a statutory assignment, this included in the budget, that the Select Committee on Pension Policy work with the Left Plan 2 Retirement Board and the State Actuary's Office and the Department of Retirement Systems to study the issue of merging Left Plan 1. There was a bill last session to merge it with Teachers Plan 1, and there was the requirement in the study also to look at the issue of merging Left Plan 1 with Left Plan 2. The Select Committee on Pension Policy at their last meeting approved a plan for moving forward where the Select Committee on Pension Policy will take the lead on the issue of studying the Left 1 TERS 1 merger, which I believe was Senate Bill 6668, and the Left 2 board won't have any part in that study. The second part of the study requirement was that the report from the State Actuary's Office that they did on a Left 1, Left 2 merger be updated. And so the board will be working with the state actuary's office to get that report updated. And then the third part was a study of left 2, left 1 merger. One of the goals of the legislature would be of legislators, of policymakers and legislative staff, that they were hoping to come out of this study was the ability to do an apples to apples or a side-by-side comparison of a merger of left 1 with TERS 1 and a merger of left 1 with left 2, and understand what the differences are. Are there significant legal differences? Are there significant administrative differences? What are the potential financial differences? The select committee, again, the left board will take the lead on the left 1, left 2 merger study piece, and the select committee asked to be kept informed. So I will plan on attending future select committee meetings and being there to either brief the committee or answer questions that the committee has about that piece of it. Now, with so I mentioned we, as at your last meeting, the Tim, can you back that up one slide, please? And if I've got the clicker, I got it. So then the at your last meeting, you asked staff to come back with a draft work plan for this interim in terms of how you would complete your assignment. The current processes that exist for the left board, you've adopted. And as part of this work plan, we were consistent with all of the processes that you adopted. One of the, now those processes are designed typically to study policy issues with the idea of coming up with a policy solution, a bill, for instance. And that was not the assignment that you were given by the legislature. If you come up with a bill, that's on your own. The legislature did not ask for a bill. However, in the course of coming up with some of the other things that the legislature would be interested in, such as actuarial costs or legal analysis, it may be that bill language is required. So that issue of how your current process fits and works to complete your assignment regarding this study is something that it's not a perfect fit, and so you will be revisiting that as this process moves along. So, Representative Vandeweghe?
Thanks, Steve. So can you write a piece of legislation on left 1, left 2 merger? Can you have that available for us to see?
Yes.
You need a motion from the board to do that?
Yes, I think that would probably be the best. And then by merger, I'm thinking just like not necessarily like a merger bill that might include like the Teachers One merger, for instance, included benefit improvements for left 1. So stripping out any potential changes to benefit improvements or anything like that, just what a physical merger would look like, that's something that we could do.
Okay. I'd like to move that Steve creates a bill on left 1, left 2 merger.
Have a second? Any further discussion? Representative Hawley?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd sort of like to go through the process, the education here over the next couple of months before we jump into that. We've got a ton of time before the next session starts here, and I think that if any such legislation is crafted, it may be affected by the information receiving process here during the course of this, the educational aspect. And just as kind of a a reflective moment when this was first proposed a couple of years back here, and we were caught rather unawares on this by legislation that was. We still can't figure out what the origination for the legislation was. We had a bit of a moment where everybody was caught totally unawares on this. I think the takeaway from that is that you have a lot of interest groups here that would want to be involved in the educational process before we actually get to the end game at this point and figure out what's going on. And simply, if you have a moment where somebody's going to combine systems, and one system, considering that you only have two sources of income for a system, you have return on investment and member contributions. If they combine this, the existing active members assume the liability of all the members. So you do two things: you change the ratio of retirees immediately within the system to the ratio of members that are contributing. That is a substantial impact. The other part is usually, in the last two times here, they talked about this. They talked about actually taking money out of the system to have available, whether it be one-time money or not, to apply to other purposes out here. And just from just 50,000 feet, if you take money out of a system and apply it towards other issues out there at the same time that you're bringing systems together, and have members that are a smaller percentage or a smaller ratio of the total body out there that's actually supporting through contribution rate fluctuation, the total package. You have that doesn't wash us actually following with our fiduciary responsibility here to provide the best we can, including increase in benefits for members out here. That it just doesn't wash so simply. So I think we're a little early in the process to come up with legislation so quickly here, proposed legislation. I would suggest waiting until we get through the process a little bit farther to figure out, if that happens, how that might be properly configured.
I would agree. I think we need to know some of the who, what, when, where, and why. And I think we also don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel, as this isn't the first time we've had this discussion. And as we can front load the discussion and the process with as much information we have, that way we are able to make obviously a much more better decision.
Well, as I understood the motion, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's not endorsing any kind of a bill. This is just draft language to facilitate the legal and actuarial analysis that you're required to provide as part of the study. Is that?
That's what I think. And Jeff, you're well aware. I mean, I think it's better to create a bill at the get-go and then start the education process after that. As we know, bills change over time dramatically, and I think it's the best legislation I've seen passed is something that starts with a bill, and then we work through that process and mold a bill. But I think it's best to start with a piece of legislation.
Mr. Chair.
This is Judy. I have a question, Kevin. The motion just included left 1 and left 2. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I did that because Steve mentioned that the SCPP was doing the left 1, TERS 1 bill. Okay,
so could you educate me? Who's SCPP? Who's that? Is that the? Okay, I get it. That's the select committee.
Yes. So the division of the work division will be the select committee will take the lead on studying a teachers 1, left 1 merger, and they already have a bill for that. That was the bill from last session.
Right.
The OSA report will be updated by OSA, and the left 1, left 2 merger piece, that study will be conducted by the left 2 board.
Oh, okay.
And I haven't got into the work plan piece of it yet, but at least I don't want to interrupt the discussion on the motion.
Representative Hall.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Vanderweg, you're spot on. I mean, you're exactly right when it comes to the process itself. But even over the years here on the board, we've been very reticent to sometimes propose legislation, because of the way it frames the issue, how you actually set a tone or an expectation of people on the outside looking in, try to figure out a direction a board is actually going, because the legislation has been drafted at this point. These are all matters of public record. And so I'm wondering, in the bigger picture, if this is something we could use as that, rather than a draft proposal, we could come up with an outline or something else out there that would not create some of the political confusion that would go along with proposing something like this so early in the process.
David?
I agree with Representative Holy and current Vice Chair, I guess, Chair, I'm not sure. Chair Fox is on the phone too, Greneman. This board works best, I think, as Representative Holy said, is to look at and identify the issues. As one of the things from my perspective that we ran into the last time that this was before the board is that we were provided a bill that we then had to respond to, and that really boxed the board into responding to somebody else's issues and somebody else's concerns. And so some of the broader issues we were not able to discuss and bring up because it had already been written for us. I think that what was outlined here was this whole educational process. Let's look at the big issues. I feel like this is jumping to the cart, and we're not even sure if we have a horse yet. So I think we need to go methodically. You look at the public testimony that we have, and we'll talk about that on the next slide, is if we were to pass this motion, we would have a significant number of public testimony right now about us that we are, I'm sure there was a lot of language about us acting before we even knew we had even studied it. So I would prefer us to study it, come up with ideas, the best ideas that this board can bring, and if a bill is the end result, that wasn't what was asked of us of the legislature. I was hoping in this conversation I would actually talk to our senator and two representatives and find out more what the legislative intent was to help guide us in our conversations, because I think the legislature was looking for our input. It may be a bill at the end, but that's something for the board to discuss at a later time and not today.
Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question for Steve. Would a bill allow us to facilitate any process better?
Yes. I heard what you were saying, Jeff, about is there something else? And I don't know, draft bill language might seem less threatening, but regardless, I think the process is going to be, as David pointed out, it's going to appear threatening to some of the stakeholders no matter what. Legal analysis on a concept or actuarial analysis on a concept is very difficult. The actuary's office, as a part of any final report, requires bill language to analyze. The legal analysis, it's difficult to get anything else other than it might be approved by the IRS or it might not be approved by the IRS, depending on the language. And until we see the language, we can't give you an opinion. So at some point in time, and I don't know that it necessarily has to be today, but at some point in time, in order to move forward on satisfying the actuarial and legal study requirements, my thought is that some kind of draft bill language will become necessary. And that's just my own personal thoughts. That could be down the road. We haven't even got to the work plan yet, but there's no thought in the work plan of providing any kind of legal or actuarial analysis in June or July. So to move forward, at least for a couple of months, without bill language would be doable. At some point in time, though, I think you'll probably get to the point where you'll need something. I can work further with the actuary's office and legal advisors to find out what alternatives may or may not be available.
Any follow-up? Michael?
I think, Steve, you kind of answered it, but do you have what would be the timeline for legal or actuary analysis?
Well, again, we're kind of skipping ahead here, or off on the way the thing was set up. We talk about the draft work plan today. You would approve the work plan at the next meeting in June. In July, there would be a discussion of what in your process is called the initial consideration. That does not require legal or actuarial analysis as a part of it. But once you get to the September meeting, where you've got the comprehensive legal and actuarial analysis it's not required, but if it's available, that can be included in the comprehensive. And you'll see, typically on complex issues, you have a comprehensive follow-up, which we tentatively put on the schedule for November. Usually by that time it's done. If there's the final presentation on this topic is set for December, and by that time, under your policies, it's required to be done. So you would be talking about the September meeting at the earliest, but probably, and on an issue like this, you don't want to wait till the very last minute to get something as important as legal analysis. So you're probably talking about September at the earliest and November at the latest. Now, there's lead time. So if you wait till September to ask for legal and actuarial analysis, there's no certainty. I can't, that'll depend then on the time frame as far as whether that could be done by November but that's roughly, here's the process. Let me just you guys take care of your motion first. Apologize.
Is there anything else to add? Mark?
Yeah, I have a comment. Kelly Fox on the phone.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, I think, although I appreciate a lot of the comments here, in my experience with the board, the next session, there's never enough time, and with all due respect, Representative Foley, I don't believe we have plenty of time. I would like to ask Steve, if we move forward with the motion, Representative Andaway's motion, and I think if we started moving now, if we asked you to draft a bill and bring it back to us for our approval, making a motion to establish it still gives us the ability and the authority to approve what you bring back to us. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So let me back up to make sure that I'm understanding the prospective instruction that was included in the motion. I understand the motion to be asking for some draft bill language that then could be used to facilitate getting legal and actuarial analysis. The approval of the bill, that if there is a bill, that is part of the final process. So that wouldn't be something, Kelly, that would take place until December. If there's some concerns about the language about that you guys want to approve the draft bill language before it goes to the actuary or before it goes to the attorneys, then yes. I don't know that the board has ever done that before, but yes, that could be done in the as soon as the draft language would be presented to the board. That would not,
Okay.
under the current work plan, that wouldn't happen until July at the earliest. So regardless of what happens in this motion, at least under the draft work plan, there won't be anything coming back to you in June. Is that clear, or did that confuse things even
No,
more?
that would be clear to me, but I do believe and agree with Representative Vandeweghe that working off of a bill has been, in my experience, a much more workable solution. People want to see, and my experience when we went through this particular topic is they wanted to see something in writing. You know, show me instead of talking conceptually about what you want to do, particularly the stakeholders. And then we had the process where we could begin to modify drafts and present and allow people that opportunity to take a look at what's there and what needs to be added, what may need to be omitted. And so I support the motion as made by Representative Vandeweghe to start the process of a draft bill that we can start to work on and find out if there is any support from the stakeholders to see how we want to proceed.
I'd like to ask a clarifying question. So in order to start an exploratory process with merger, am I correct in saying that the only way to do that is with draft language?
To start the exploratory process, no. You can start the process without bill language. Ultimately, to complete the process, that's where I think, at this point in time, I think you may need bill language. I'm trying to, I don't think you're going to be able to get any kind of legal advice that will be helpful to the board or to the legislative policymakers as part of a report without something for them to analyze. On the actuarial side, I'm not 100% sure without talking to the actuaries what they could or could not do without bill language.
Representative Hawley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a compromise, in 2011, we actually had a draft proposal. At the time, we had Ice Miller review it for us. We actually had the DRS and OSA reviewed it for us. I mean, we had all that stuff in place, and I can't see the draft language being significantly different this time. Rather than jumping to and doing something and reinventing the wheel, so to speak, would you be able to review that and use that as a basis from a proposal to draft current legislation and accomplish split the baby, so to speak?
We could use some past bill language, modernized, if you will, in other words, made current, to get analysis. I don't know if, and that may be sufficient. I don't know what the attorneys would want to see. They did provide analysis on that in the past, and there may be, based on their feedback, in better language or current language, if you will, would probably be helpful. Otherwise, you're just going to get the exact same opinion that you got 5 years ago. Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to speak against the motion for one reason only, because I think that all the stakeholder groups need to be informed first that we're moving forward this way, that we've been directed by the legislature to move forward, and I don't see some of the stakeholder member groups, representatives in the room today, and I'm just very sensitive to the fact that there was a lot of criticism the last time this came up, and I think that I think all the stakeholder groups need to be notified that this is where we're going, and I don't think it's gonna alter the ultimate outcome, but I want to make sure that to the extent possible, that we give adequate notice that the process is moving forward. I'm in support of the process. I'm not necessarily against bill language. I think what I hear today is that's going to happen. I think that will happen eventually, but I don't want to get too far ahead, and I don't think that the time constraints are so tight that we need to do that right now.
Michael?
So what I'm hearing, I think, is that we will likely do bill language in the future, just not necessarily today. So I'd like to propose that we table the motion until the June meeting.
Under the rules of procedure, then the next step would be to vote on the motion to table. We're not talking about that right now. You're voting on the motion to table.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a vote to table. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye.
Was there one opposed?
No, I was just late saying aye on the motion.
Very good.
All right, we will flag that for follow-up in the June meeting. Now, with that, let me get back to the work plan discussion, if you will. The first part about the work plan that we, as staff, that we thought it would be helpful is if the board had some discussion about goals. What are there's the statutory assignment that you have, but in order to complete that assignment, did you as a board have some goals? And so we, to facilitate that discussion, but not substitute for that discussion, we provided some draft ideas of goals for your consideration. First off, there is pension plan mergers are very complex, and there's not been a lot of information about them or public discussion about them, and many board members in particular were not around even when what discussion took place in the past. So goal one, this would be making sure that all the board members, and to the extent that it can be included in the report, that you are educated just about the topic of a merger, separate and apart from left one or left two or any specific plan. Just what is a plan merger and how does it work? Then the assignment that is the ultimate output would be information that would enable a comparison of a left plan merger, including the legal issues, the fiscal impacts, and the administrative complexities. You talked about that quite a bit here. That'll be something that will be a part of the final report. In putting together the draft work plan, one of the suggested items was as much opportunity for stakeholder input as was possible. And so you will see on the draft work plan that's coming up the schedule that there is something related to merger on every meeting. This is a very complicated topic with a lot to cover, and so in order to accomplish it during the interim, there is something scheduled for every meeting, and there is opportunity for stakeholder input scheduled for every meeting. That includes the left one member and retirees, left one and left two employers. The employers are represented on the board, but this may be one of those issues where employer stakeholder groups would also like to testify to the entire board. And also, at least right now, some of the left employers they don't have a member on the board right now, and so maybe, like for instance, counties, that may be an opportunity for them to provide their input. Left two members and retirees, how would a merger affect them and get any input that they might have? And then, of course, there's the coordination with the SCPP. David, you mentioned the idea at the last meeting of the possibility of even scheduling a coordinated meeting with the SCPP where both bodies could meet at the same time. We looked into that with the SC. They have already adopted, like you have, their schedule for the interim and reported it to the code revisor's office as you have, so that it could be published in advance. At this point in time, it was too early in the process for them to say yes or no about whether or not a special meeting could be scheduled or would be beneficial. Those are, historically, those are extraordinarily difficult to schedule. So in addition to the 10 left, 2 board members, the SCPP currently has 20 members. So, and they're working all, as I'll get to later on in my SCPP update, they're working on some other issues as well. So a coordinated meeting of both bodies may not be possible, but it's at least out there right now as a possibility. The final goal would then be a full written report with the analysis that we've talked about. With those sort of rough goals in mind, we came together with a proposed draft work schedule for you. Talk about the draft work plan today and get any input that you had, such as the motion and the discussion. That was helpful. At the June meeting, there'd be, you would vote to approve the final work plan based on any changes, discussion that happens today or follow-up. At the June meeting, the first step would be an educational briefing on merger. Again, this is not on a left 1, left 2 merger. This is not on this is, in general, the concept of merger. To the extent that any specific stuff would be talked about, it would mainly just be in a historical context. So like a left 1, left 2 merger was proposed in 2010 and studied by the board in 2011 without really going into it. To the extent that you have questions, we could go into it, but that's more the type of stuff that would begin to get fleshed out at the July meeting. That's where it would be more focused on a left 1, left 2 merger. What are the specifics about a left 1, left 2 merger that are different from mergers in general? The June report would be more about in general, because there's all kinds of questions that tend to come up. How does the state save money in a merger? What does it mean for member benefits and constitutional protections in a merger? Why does the IRS have to approve mergers? Those are all the just basic questions that have nothing to do with left 1, left 2. But that's where the questions tend to come up. And a lot of those questions, there's not the opportunity for them to be discussed in a legislative hearing during session. So a lot of these things were not really discussed at all with respect to TERS 1, left 1, and that the SCPP will be following up on that this interim. That was one of the reasons for the legislature creating the study, was for an opportunity to increase understanding among policymakers and stakeholders about mergers in general and mergers more specific. For instance, there was a lot of concern that how could any merger ever be approved? And yet at the same time, when you look at it historically, and I don't want to spoil what you're going to get in June, you'll see that there have been a number of mergers already in the state of Washington even. Left Plan 1 was created by merging a bunch of local plans, and PERS also included the merger of statewide cities' employee retirement systems at one point in time. So their mergers have happened. They've even happened in Washington, but they haven't happened recently. And so at the June educational briefing will be sort of at that high level, the 20,000-foot level. And then you'll get down to more like 5,000 feet, if you will, at the July meeting. That'll be more tailored towards left 1, left 2. For purposes of the draft work plan, and you'll see this later on for the interim work plan, we did not make adjustments to the board's historical decisions to not meet in August and to have your strategic planning in October. So we didn't put anything on there for August, and we didn't put anything on there for October. Of course, ultimately, those decisions are up to you. If you decide to meet in August, and the agenda for August you'll develop. If you end up deciding that this interim that you are not going to do strategic planning and you want to use the October meeting for additional policy discussion, again, that'll be your decision. But for purposes of this draft work plan and for the draft interim work plan that I'll discuss a bit later, that was not included. Now, the next step in the board's report process is what's called a comprehensive report. This gets into much more detail, and that's typically where you will begin to look at policy options. You'll begin to look at legal and actuarial analysis if it's available. There would be a discussion of potential alternatives and the pros and cons of those alternatives, with the idea that you would have some discussion and then provide some direction back to the team, which would be included in a final proposal. Now, that type of discussion, particularly for a topic as complex as merger, that often takes more than one meeting. In fact, at times in the past, it's taken more than 2 meetings. But at least for purposes of this process, for this draft work schedule, we've got 2. You would get that first level at the September meeting, and to the extent that there was follow-up necessary to that, that would take place at the November meeting. At the November meeting, we would potentially be providing outside counsel available to the board to answer questions related to legal analysis. We'll also, at least tentatively, have that time set aside for OSA to present the results of their update of the merger study that they did in 2011. And in the meantime, I'll find out, for instance, how much of this stuff in November would require bill language so that you have that information available when you consider the motion at your June meeting. And I apologize for not being able to answer that question better today. December is your final meeting. Now, one of the things, and so whatever your final report is, we've got it scheduled for adopting in December. To the extent that this time period, that this becomes insufficient. So, for instance, if you're unable to reach agreement or there are suggested changes to your December report, then it may become necessary to schedule a special board meeting. Perhaps if as you discuss this during June and July, there additional questions come out, you may end up needing a special meeting. But at least for purposes of today, this is the draft plan that we put together, that you asked for last meeting, that we put together for your consideration today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you guys for any questions or input that you have on this. And then that would, you don't have to adopt the plan today, but to the extent that there's anything on there for June that you either want to add or change, then you need to take care of that today. The idea would be, though, that you would finalize the work plan at your next meeting. I didn't want to drop it on you and ask you to finalize it all in the same meeting.
I have a question. I haven't actually seen the statutory language. Can you tell us specifically what we're required to do? Exactly what we're required to do?
Yeah, I apologize for that. The statutory language was included in the meeting materials for last month, and I don't have a copy of it right in front of me. But there was a study requirement in the bill, in the budget, that directed the office, that directed the Select Committee on Pension Policy to work with the Left 2 Board, the Department of Retirement Systems, and the Office of the State Actuary to study. There were three things. One, study the Senate Bill 6668, the Left 1 TERS 1 merger that was proposed last session, to update the 2011 report that was prepared by the Office of the State Actuary, and to study a Left 1, Left 2 merger. So in coordination with the Select Committee on Pension Policy, the division of responsibilities, if you will, is the Select Committee is going to focus on the TERS 1, Left 1 merger. The Left 2 Board is going to focus on the Left 1, Left 2 merger. The actuary will update their merger study with more current information, and then present that. They will present that updated report both to the Select Committee and to the Left 2 Board later on in the interim. Some of the other, that's the statutory, that's the specific direction in the study language.
And what I heard you saying earlier, then, in order to accomplish that, we're going to need to come up with draft bill language in order to actually fulfill that requirement?
I believe so,
Okay.
but I believe so.
Okay.
Because ultimately, what the goal of the legislature, I think the expectation, if you will, or the motivation behind the study was with the expectation that merger will come up again as legislation during the upcoming session. The TERS 1, Left 1 merger bill, a Left 1, Left 2 merger bill, both potentially all could come up. And legislators wanted to have information that would allow them to consider those proposals thoroughly. What are the differences, if any, between the two? Are there legal differences? Are there administrative differences? Particularly since the merger was part of the budget, are there financial differences? That was the ultimate goal of the legislature in asking for the study. So in order to sort of meet not just your statutory requirements, but their desired outcomes of a report, those are the three things that they're kind of looking for. Now, that's all we have for the draft plan. And again, if I go back here to so for the June meeting, there would be an educational briefing and there would be an opportunity for public testimony. All of the agendas are sent out, currently being sent out to all of the Left 1 stakeholder groups that have been here before the board and asked to be kept informed of this process. And they are also going to have the opportunity to provide public testimony. I don't know exactly how much, but before the Select Committee. And the OSA report includes an opportunity for public input as well. The updated report may also include then a third area where the Left 1 stakeholders can provide public input, because they're a common denominator for all three of those pieces.
Go ahead, Mark.
Just a couple of comments, and I guess I would opinionate a little bit here. That it appears to me that we're required by the legislature to do this, which means eventually we are going to have to come up with some draft bill language, whatever that is, in order to accomplish what they want us to accomplish through the statute. It's also would then be my opinion that writing that draft bill language in the due course of time would be an opportunity for us to mold take the opportunity to provide the best possible outcome, because the legislature, it appears, has an agenda to do that. So I think that it provides an opportunity for us to get in early and not wait to oppose something potentially written by another legislator or a group or a caucus that might have a different perspective on pension plans and funding of pension plans and all the other things that go into it.
As a measure of clarification, when we meet next month in June, we'll have a clear indication as far as what the language says regarding whether we need to build language to move forward.
I'll be prepared to discuss your motion at the June meeting, yes.
Very good. Any other discussion? David?
Thank you, Chair. As we look at the final work plan, it would be helpful in the past, been on the board long enough that I don't want us to underestimate the impact of that public testimony and the goal of transparency with the public in this process. So I am very concerned that the board has already jumped to the conclusion that it needs to write a bill. That is not the legislative intent. The legislative intent was to study these options. In those options, we can ask the stakeholders, you can list all these options of governance, financial, legal, how, when. All of these questions have lots of different possible answers. And I really believe that if we jump to writing a bill, people will feel that we have not listened to them, that we already have the end in sight, and that it will go right back to the divisive issues. It was one of those issues, just from being on the board, it was one of the most difficult conversations that we had around this board. And I was hoping that this would be a different, more inclusive process. And so I was hopeful as I looked at this plan that it was a very methodical, working on it, very clear directions on when we as a board need to make decisions. Earlier today, we saw how we make rate decisions. And you'll see that, here's what we need to learn. We learn that. The next meeting, we talk about it. We get options. And then the next time, we actually have to take action on those things. To have a motion that was going to have us create a bill today that wasn't on the agenda is concerning to me, that we're already jumping to conclusions. As you create, I would just give pause, as you create that work plan, is be very clear about when the board needs to weigh in on these things. What I heard was the legislature wanted us to study these options and give us their opinion. It may include a bill, and I heard that bill could come in September, could come in July. I did not hear that it needed to be written in June with no public testimony on the options that are before us. So I would like the final, I'm glad that we're going to talk about it today. I'm intrigued by the June meeting about what that actual work plan will include and decision-making that the board needs to come to conclusions on. What should be in a bill? What would be the things that we would ask the actuary and legal to study? That will help us craft our options, and we can give the legislature those. If you do this is a good idea. These are the pros and cons. Those are the type of results that I was hoping that this process would lead to, and I'm looking forward to that work plan to outline all those things. Thank you.
Further discussion?
Okay. If there are no further questions then on the work plan, the draft merger study work plan, the next item up on the agenda was an administrative update. Lunch is scheduled to be served at 11:15, and so I would like to ask the board, get some input from the board here on whether you would like to move the item number 7 on the agenda, the draft interim work plan, up to now. That may not be able to be completed in 15 minutes, but you could still take a break and work on that. Or just go ahead and try to bang out the administrative update quickly and then move on to the work plan. I know that not all of the board members, we may lose some of you by 1 o'clock, and so I wanted to make sure that the interim work plan was scheduled in such a way that all of you would have a chance to participate in that discussion.
So moved.
All right. The then let me. Do you want to take a 15-minute break, grab lunch, and then come in and we'll start on the work plan while you're eating?
Yes.
All right.
All right, we'll break for lunch.
Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order.
Okay, next item up on the agenda then will be the draft interim work plan. And as you'll recall from the last meeting, there were a number of topics that had been either moved forward to this interim from the past interim, or had come up as a result of legislation this past session, or that were suggested by individual board members for possible discussion this interim. And we gave you a rough idea or a rough outline of all of those topics last month. You asked us to come back with sort of a draft work plan, and a couple of principles that we used to come up with this draft plan so that you get an idea is we didn't, the team, we didn't want to do any prioritizing for you. So everything that you talked about last month is covered at least in some part. Now, a number of the topics, they might just be one presentation, an educational briefing on something, or a presentation from an outside party or organization. And so there's no continuing work, or in some cases, the staff work for those is fairly minimal. But there are a number that are continuing items. Those will be the ones that, as you move from a draft work plan to a final work plan, that you're going to have to pay particular attention to, because those are the ones where the prioritization is going to be critical. Also for purposes of this interim work plan, as we worked as a team, I've got a lot of capacity on my team. Many of you have been on the board a long time. You remember Tim came up as a research analyst, and so he's going to take a chunk of this, and so am I. So between the four of us, we were able to at least propose, as part of this work plan, give you an introduction to every single one of the issues. And then at least some of the issues were very familiar to some board members and completely new to others. At least everybody will be educated, all the board members will be educated on every issue, and you will all be able to then hopefully prioritize which issues you want to move forward with or not. So with that discussion, for May, we did this again as sort of a calendar-wise. You'll also see, I don't want to spoil it too much, but a lot of it is front-loaded. Some of the one-time things, they're scheduled because that was the only time that the presenter was available. But May, June, and July are agendas that, particularly June and July, I think you'll see as you go through, finish up the rate adoption process and get started on some of the merger work, those are going to be heavy months. Today, it was to introduce you to the work plan, introduce you to the merger study work plan, and then two of the items that, or at least one of the items that was a one-time deal, that is the educational briefing on workforce retirement trends and statistics. So you'll get that today. The other item that you'll get today is just an educational briefing on the topic of non-LEOFF firefighters. There was a bill dealing with one small piece of this issue last session, and there has been another piece of this issue that I have briefed you about in the admin update a while back related to public hospital districts and the status of firefighters employed by public hospital districts. But in addition to those two, I can't remember, I want to say there's like 9 different spins on this same kind of broader issue. The purpose of today's educational briefing will just be mainly to let you see sort of the universe of how of this issue. A lot of these you've never heard about before, or many of the board members have not heard about before, and it's very possible that none of the board members have heard about all 9 of these before. Paul will be doing that a little bit later. What we have proposed then for June, and this is, June will be a very busy month. Fair warning, for those of you who were on the board at the beginning and remembered fondly the days of the 6-hour meetings where you were still ready to keep going at 3:30. I know, Mark, I'm looking at you. June is likely to be one of the longer meetings that some of the newer board members have experienced. And especially for some of you, I know there's a lot of competition for your calendars, and you may have been able to plan on doing things in the afternoon on a board meeting day. I would respectfully ask that you don't plan on doing that in the June meeting. There'll be a lot for you to cover. Part of it will be the rate adoption process, and so June and likelihood July. But for instance, you had asked for an education the meeting is not on Saturday, June 25th. It's, what is it, the 22nd? Yeah, sorry about that typo. So you will get the next stage that Lisa talked about in the rate setting process. That'll include a preview of the rates and an initial presentation from the outside auditing actuaries. Those are hired by the Pension Funding Council. I work with the Pension Funding Council work group. They coordinate so that the same firm that's doing the audit for their valuations is doing it for your valuation. Those of you who were here 2 years ago, you'll remember Mark Alleman and Nick from Milliman. They were the same people that worked on the audit 2 years ago and presented to the board. You'll get a presentation, it's sort of an educational briefing from Bridget Smith from the Board of Volunteer Firefighters. And they also cover reserve police officers. And as you'll recall from this last session, there's increasing activity around that borderline where people transition from volunteer or part-time status into full-time status, whether that ends up being in PERS or in LEOFF. And Bridget's here to talk about her plan, how that borderline works, if you will, and the benefits that are provided to members of their plan. Two of the annual updates that the board receives from DRS are both scheduled for June. Marcy Frost will make her presentation about customer satisfaction in particular, but also initiatives underway at the Department of Retirement Systems and how they will impact LEOFF Plan 2 members, and to the extent that they are coordinating those efforts with us. And then the annual presentation from Cost Effective Management, the CEM benchmarking presentation. Mark Feldhausen from DRS has done that for a number of years. He'll do it again, but he'll be joined this time by a different representative from CEM. You will approve, scheduled to approve. I don't want to, you are scheduled to approve your work plan for the remainder of the interim and your merger work plan for the remainder of the interim. Those will obviously be items that you'll discuss, and it's some pieces of it may still be draft, if you will, or unfinalized after the June meeting, but at least the goal is that the team, that we understand what we need to be working on for the remainder of the interim, so we can start doing our resource planning. As part of the work plan that you saw earlier on merger, there will be an educational briefing on just the general concept of merger, not anything specific. You will also get an initial consideration on the topic of standby pay. This is an item that is in DRS rule, that standby pay is not compensation earnable. It's not something that's subject to bargaining or anything. It's in DRS WAC. There was, so this will just be an initial consideration. If there's any, this will be, as I mentioned earlier, there are some of these issues that if they're going to continue on, they would require more work. But at least for each of the issues, we wanted to give you that initial, and this is the initial on standby pay. There was a brief educational presentation last month on retirees returning to work, and as you saw, historically that issue, when the board had considered it, had been more around the issue of chiefs returning to work after they had retired. But as you heard last month, now it's not just chiefs and other administrative staff, but there also tends to be more bottom-up, if you will, pressure on either members returning to work in a full-time or part-time capacity as they've retired in what are traditionally more line-type positions. And so the broader piece of this retiree return to work will be discussed, and that kind of ties in with also the volunteer, as I mentioned earlier, that transition between volunteer and full-time membership in the retirement systems. And then one of the other items that was asked for that was a one-time piece was a LEOFF Plan 2 comparison report, and this will be pulling together a number of the different things that we've talked about in the past with respect to LEOFF 2. Maybe following up on the Washington State Institute of Public Policy, their comparison, but talking about other issues that weren't included in the state policy report, such as funding status or salaries or some of the other. Their focus was mainly on what they called a percentage of your income in retirement. So June, as you'll see, June is a full month. That LEOFF Plan 2 comparison report, to the extent that, as we get into this, to the extent that the timing is, that there's too much on June, that's one that could get punted back. But we were also trying to knock out some of the one-timers as early as possible so that they weren't getting in the way of any ongoing issues that you decide to work on. In July, then, the focus of the July meeting historically has always been on rate adoption. That's your primary statutory duty as a board, is to adopt rates. You will get the final results from the actuary's office and the final audit results from Milliman, and then you will be adopting rates. But for this interim, we needed to add some additional topics to the July meeting in order to be able to fit everything in. So that as part of this draft proposal, this is a little bit of a divergence from past practice, especially maybe over the last 6 years, where there will be some items on the agenda for July not related to rate setting. I mentioned earlier there'll be the initial consideration of merger. That would be more taking it from just merger as a concept, general principles of merger, into a little bit more specific of what does that mean for a left one, left two. Retiree medical. This is a follow-up of the discussion that you had last interim about what types of IRS-approved plans are there to allow members to save for their own retirement, and what would it mean to set up one of those plans statewide for Left Plan 2 members? Which of the 4 types of vehicles would be the best, and what would be the administrative impacts of setting something like that up? Now, this is just the initial. So those would be the types of questions you would be digging into if you chose to pursue this. It's a fairly, that'll be a fairly labor-intensive, it would take a lot of staff work to carry that one through to conclusion. Similarly, presumptive medical. This is an issue that the board has talked about in the past. There are a number of cancers that are currently presumed to be duty-related for some firefighters. And in the past, the board has looked at this issue from a couple of different perspectives, either expanding the types of cancers that are considered presumptive based on updated medical studies, expanding the numbers of types of firefighters that are covered by the presumption, or expanding the presumption to cover heart attacks and strokes for law enforcement officers and firefighters. Those have been policy issues that have been debated by the board in the past. This is just an initial consideration, so it would be more giving you the current status of where those issues sit. So, for instance, have there been any medical study updates that would meet the requirements that were established by labor and industries when the first presumptions went into effect? What is the status of some of the medical studies that were ongoing the last time the board considered this topic with respect to law enforcement officers? And a reminder kind of what the past stuff was. Again, if that's an issue that the board would decide to pursue, it would require significant staff time during the rest of the interim. The budget updates, those are usually those are part of the administrative update. I won't include admin update items on the work plan, but just as a FYI, you'll continue to get the admin updates monthly and the quarterly budget updates quarterly as part of the admin update. I mentioned earlier in discussing the merger draft work plan, we did not, in putting together this draft plan for your consideration today, did not schedule anything for August. Historically, that meeting has been canceled. This also then gives you the option that to the extent that you reach agreement on which issues you want to study, you'll be able to evaluate then whether or not you'll need an August meeting to accomplish that, or whether we'll need an August meeting to accomplish what you are asking for us. That'll probably become more clear as you wrap up the July meeting and you get through sort of the first batch of all of those initial considerations. And it'll spin out of your discussions and agreement on prioritization. September then would be the annual financial audit that you get every year. We've got it scheduled. It'll depend on whether Steve Davis is able to finish it by September, but historically has been. And that'll be also when you get the annual update. There is some annual training that's required. We put that in September because at least at this point in time, the agenda is less full for September, and this is one of the pieces I was trying to point out earlier. June and July are going to be very busy. After that, a lot of stuff could be added to September depending on decisions that you make. So each of those initial considerations that I mentioned earlier, if you decide to move those on to the next step for comprehensives, then we would be trying to prepare those comprehensives for September. And so how much September fills up will be up to the decisions that you as a board make in June and July. October is historically when you do your strategic planning, and again, we did not want to change that. So we kept, for the purposes of this plan, we continued your past practice of using October for an off-site meeting to discuss your strategic issues and not policy issues. Then following the October meeting, under your report process, this is where all of those initial items that perhaps were moved to comprehensives or moved to comprehensives in September and you decide you need more follow-up on, that's where things come in November. There will be, in addition to those potential topics, as you'll recall, there was an update of the merger study that's on the merger report. That'll be from OSA. Scheduled for November. It may move back if it's not completed. Also, as you'll recall at the last meeting, Lisa mentioned one of the items that'll be brought to the board as part of the annuity purchase legislation. The existing administrative factors for annuity purchases need to be adjusted because the age of people who purchase annuities in retirement is significantly different from the age of members who purchase at the time of retirement. So the existing factors are not appropriate for purchasing annuities by retirees, and they'll bring those factors to you for your adoption. The window for those that annuity purchase to become effective is January. So November, that'll be a little bit, you'll be getting that issue for the first time and asked to adopt those issues or adopt those factors, but to the extent that you need additional time, then the December meeting is available as a fallback. Hopefully, though, that will be fairly straightforward, and we'll be able to help you guys get that one done in November. The final actuarial valuation report, the results of that after the board's adoption of rates at the July meeting, the work is usually then complete by November, and the Office of the State Actuary gives a presentation on the results of that report. And Lisa also mentioned at last month's meeting that the Office of the State Actuary is doing an update of their risk assessment. And this will, the November meeting is when they're scheduled to give you a briefing. In the December meeting, that's where you'll be doing all of your final presentations, whatever those may be. So this is the draft interim work plan that we came up. As you'll see, a lot of it will depend ultimately on decisions that you make particularly in June and July. But if there are any questions about this, or especially if there's any questions about June, please, now would be the good time to jump in.
We had a pretty good conversation, I thought, at the last board meeting of how do we prioritize our work plan and have the capacity of the staff. I'm very concerned that every single idea that was put on the list of brainstormed ideas last month is on our work plan to talk about. That's not usually how the board has worked in the past. I'm kind of a little bit surprised by this method, that any idea that a single board member now is on our work plan and our staff are working on it. I would have liked a more strategic and methodical prioritization of our staff, because we know what is mandated of us each year is our contribution rates. We have to do that. I tried to get some things off the list of these updates and reports, and so the board was very clear that they wanted to hear those. So those are on the list. The merger is a significant work plan item, and it's going to continue. What I don't see here is public testimony every single meeting. Just block out an hour. We have a lot of stakeholders that will be coming here. I think that in the work plan we'll be talking about coming back to the board. This is a overly aggressive work plan for the next 3 months. I don't think it's a reasonable work plan for us to talk about and move forward. So I'd like to find a process that we can prioritize our time to actually what is real here, and not just any idea that is from any single board member to be brought to the board. I'd like to hear from other board members if they feel like this is a reasonable. I've never seen that many agenda items on the last 6 years of agendas in this board meeting. So I don't want us to set us up for failure, and I think that the merger study is going to take a lot of our time and effort this year. And so that really should be our focus. And we should clear the decks so we can really focus on that and not have the same difficulties we had back in 2011, that we can do a better job this time. Thanks.
Any other comments? Steve, just in response to that, I thought the initial comment you made was that with the staff we have, you were not concerned that this was overly ambitious. I mean, I think that's how you, I mean, we rely upon you to give us that advice and counsel about the workload on our staff.
I appreciate that. It's not the role of the team to make your decisions about prioritizing your workload. And so one of the things that came up in the discussion last month was, I raised concerns that there were more topics than there was capacity. And you asked us reasonably then to kind of come back and come up with a plan. Part of that plan, we're not going to prioritize. So every one of the issues, we did the best that we could to include at least a touch on one of those issues, on every one of the issues that you asked about at the last month. And we can do that. It does require kind of stretching a little bit. As I mentioned, Tim and I are going to pick up some of the impact. It will also require stretching on your part because, as I mentioned, the agenda will be more full. That not only means longer than it has been for some of you historically, but also it will have more topics, which can be challenging if you're dealing with 4 or 5 different policy topics, and some of them are very complex policy topics. all in one meeting, that can be challenging for you as well. But ultimately, those decisions are on you in terms of how much you want to put on your plate. At this point in time, I can commit that we can do everything that's on this proposed work plan. Now, the decisions that you make to add additional items to this work plan, that'll be more where we're, especially resource-intensive issues, then it may get to the point where I would have to say, where I would have to respectfully request you to take something off. You can't do them all. I can say that right now, I don't have any clear idea about how we would be able to do a thorough job of all of these issues if you chose as a board to move them all from initial to comprehensive to final. And I don't expect that you would end up with 7 bills and policy recommendations. But ultimately, how you take this list from what it is now down to whatever it ends up being, that'll be up to you. I can say, though, Mr. Chair, we can commit to doing a thorough job on every one of the items that are on this work plan as it stands now. The next stages will get more challenging. This stage is challenging, as David mentioned. We haven't had this many items on the board's interim work plan in a very long time.
I don't know about that, Steve, because when I look at like this list on the 25th, there's a lot of updates, and I mean these aren't actual, the merger will be intensive and will take some time, but the other things, standby pay, retire, return to work, we may end up hearing about it and that's it. Okay, we've heard it.
Yes.
Doesn't seem plausible, or I don't know what that will be until I hear about it.
That's right, and that's what I'm talking about. Is we can do all of this if, for instance, at the June meeting that you decide we want a comprehensive on standby pay and we want a comprehensive on retiree return to work. And then in July you say, and we want a comprehensive on retiree medical and a comprehensive on presumptive medical. That's when it'll be like, well, then the only way that that's going to work, for instance, would be we're going to meet in August. And some of those would flow over into September, et cetera. But also the prioritization, again, maybe it's too soon and maybe I'm out of place, and if I am, forgive me. But it will be a rate-setting year, and adoption of the board's rates has typically been a top priority of the board for the upcoming session. And whatever ends up happening with merger is, by all indications from the legislature, going to be a topic of conversation. It's going to be a topic for the next legislative session. And so I would also say I don't know, and this is a decision for you, how much else do you want on your plate for the upcoming session besides rates and merger? And if the decision is, one topic or 6 topics or 0 topics, that'll be up to you, and we'll do our best to meet your requests.
Yeah, I just don't see us as a board being dismissive of anything until we get a chance. At least, I think your term was touch on it. Maybe we just touch on it and we say, it's not going to work this time around, or that's not, it's going to be a priority. But I can't say that by looking at these topics when somebody in good faith brings them to us, whether it's a board member or somebody that's a stakeholder brings it to us. I think they have faith in us to at least discuss it and give it some light of day before we say we don't have time for it. I mean, that was our experience with the old joint committee for a number of years, was that you just didn't make it on the priority list, no matter how many times you asked or how important it was to that stakeholder group. So that's how I think we can winnow it down. We're only going to be able to do what we can do, and I think we've been realistic about that. And then at the end of the day, when we have discussions and agenda items that become proposals, I think we've been pretty good at being, pretty realistic about what's possible. So, all right, any other comments?
Then I would like to make sure that we have a process for all-comer ideas for future board conversations. Then, if every single idea that comes to the board will be put on our agenda, I would like to make sure that that's clear to all our stakeholders, that any idea that comes before the board will come to our agenda. Well, then let's go and do that. Let's say that
David,
publicly, and let's say that clearly.
We're not saying that everybody
you
comes
just
up
said
with some
that.
crackpot idea. But when someone comes up with something and we talk about it here, and it ends up on this agenda, it isn't because it was some whim.
The board has a process down, so let me back up. I don't want there to be confusion and discussion about something that doesn't. The board has a process for how items get on the agenda, and the only way that items get on the agenda is by board action. Now, typically that board action will take place at the April meeting, and so, for instance, at the April meeting this year, there was the review, and then there was the of the past legislative session, and then there was the preview of the upcoming interim. The preview includes anything that by past board action you have asked to be put on the agenda, and that's also the opportunity for board members to ask the board about other items that they would like to be on the agenda, and that took place at the April meeting. And as a board, you asked us to come back with a work plan that included, and that's what we did. I think because there were so many items, that was typically the work plan step doesn't come into play. But the only way an item gets on the board agenda is by board action. And what I try to do, be very careful about, is anytime there is a presentation on any topic, part of my introduction, maybe you're listening and maybe you're not, but part of my introduction is exactly how did this topic that you're about to hear get on the agenda today? And though, because oftentimes a board member may not be present at the meeting where it was decided to put a topic on the agenda. So that's the opportunity for, if there's any questions about how this got on. But for instance, if a members write in letters all the time, I'd like this issue discussed. We forward those letters on to you, and if you guys decide to put them on the agenda, that's how it gets on there. But the only way it gets on the agenda is by action of the whole board, not even one board member. One board member can suggest an idea for discussion at the April meeting saying, hey, I think this is an important issue, and I'd like the board to consider it this interim, but it doesn't get on the agenda unless the board says so. And this is actually your first chance at saying what's going to go on the agenda. That's why it's a draft work plan. We wanted to give you an idea of what it would be like if you decided as a board to touch on all of these that you mentioned last month. You can winnow some of them out now. You can winnow some of them out next month. But this is at least our attempt to give you a feel for what it would look like if you don't winnow anything out. Hopefully that was clarifying and not confusing.
This board works really well on making sure that we can talk about things, Chair Fox, and then we thank you very much, but we don't have that on our work plan. So I'll give that in June and July we'll go through all these topics, and then we'll start to prioritize which ones we actually want to spend our time and energy. But I just want to say it from the get-go is that this is a very aggressive ideas, and we cannot do them all. And I'm going to push back on that when we get down to the prioritization of when we actually spend staff time. So you'll hear it again from me. I just want to make sure that I'm open to bringing ideas forward and having that conversation, doing some initial consideration. But when it actually comes to focus on the board using staff time and resources to do these things, I'll be very clear about where our priorities lie. So thank you.
Is that complete item number 7 then, Steve?
Yes.
Okay.
The,
All right. We'll go back to item number 4, your update.
Yes.
Okay.
There is no presentation for the admin update.
Did we adopt the work plan?
No,
Okay.
the adoption of the work plan will take place in June. So
Okay.
since there was no
Additions.
no motions regarding June, we're moving forward with the June meeting as it was presented to you in the draft work plan. And then after that, as David mentioned, you'll be making a number of different votes at the June and July meetings. That'll be finalizing that work plan. For the administrative update, there are a couple of items regarding, first off, the Select Committee on Pension Policy. I've already mentioned that the Select Committee, their decision on how to move forward with coordination on the merger topic. There's one other very meaty, for lack of a better word, topic that the Select Committee will be working on this interim, which doesn't directly affect Left 2, but it may be of some interest, and that is a Washington State Patrol compensation report. There was a very detailed outside study of the State Patrol and the challenges that they're facing in recruiting and retention. One of the recommendations of that report had to do with State Patrol salary, and I don't remember how it turned out in the budget, but I think there was some increase for trooper salary in the budget. But there were a number of other recommendations in that report that the Select Committee will be following up on. For instance, one of the topics that was mentioned in the report was as a potential tool for retaining troopers who are at retirement age or approaching retirement age is a drop plan. There wasn't any discussion about what kind of drop or the potential costs of drop, but I mention that to you because to the extent that it is discussed or could be discussed and may end up in legislation, that is certainly a topic then that could flow over. A drop plan is what's called a deferred retirement option plan. It allows a person to work after retirement. They retire on a specific day, and then but they continue working. And what tends to happen is they don't receive their pension. Their pension goes into this drop account. Maybe it earns interest, maybe it earns investment earnings, maybe not. Maybe the member and the employer continue to contribute, maybe not. But in any event, there's the number of the features of a drop plan are extraordinarily broad. What it does tend to do, though, is it impacts on when people retire. So, and it impacts it by usually then they retire earlier than they otherwise would have, which has a cost to the pension plan. So I only mention it in that sense. The discussion of drop with respect to the State Patrol could leak over to some kind of discussion amongst your stakeholder groups about the pros and cons of drop, particularly employers that are having difficulty retaining employees. A follow-up, though, one other item that was mentioned in the report is one of the reasons why the patrol is having trouble retaining employees is they've got a 20 and out provision in their plan. And for members who are approaching that 20 and out threshold, they listed in their study as that was one of the number one drivers why they were retiring when they were retiring. And so part of the report was saying if you've got a retention problem, then one of the other potential solutions to that retention problem would be coming up with what they called a more modern retirement plan, and mentioned specifically left 2 as an example, where you've got a later retirement date and you don't have a 20 and out type of provision. Whether that would mean a separate Trooper 3 plan, or whether that would actually mean new troopers moving into left 2, they didn't go into any of that kind of detail or discussion, and I don't know that the select committee is going to talk about that at all. But again, I mentioned that only as a item that could flow out of this trooper compensation report discussion that the select committee will be working on this interim. The other item, as far as outreach activities, Tammy is not with us here today because she is at the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. So she's manning the table there, answering questions about the Ombudsman program, and has information as well. She will be coming back late tonight and then doing a handoff to Tim and I. Tim and I will be manning the table at the WACOPS annual convention, their general membership meeting. We'll be there Thursday and Friday at the table answering questions for the members, and then I'm presenting on Friday. And the topic of the presentation will just be the board bills from last session. However, especially given the discussion today, I would expect that other topics are likely to come up, and so like merger, for instance. So I'm looking forward to Friday now. I'll work on my Zen between now and then. Also, the Washington State Council of Firefighters will be meeting at the end of June. We'll have another meeting between now and then, but I wanted to mention that we'll be at that meeting. It's in Vancouver, or is it in, Vancouver. We'll have a table there. There's no presentations scheduled at that. That's usually the discussion of upcoming legislative agenda, though, so the different committees may have questions about what the board is working on, and we'll be there mainly as a resource. That's at the end of June. With that, let's see. I don't have anything else for the admin update. Are there any questions? All right.
No, just so you know, the WACOPS event, they usually are armed there. So
I was early on in
I can second that.
in my career with the board. I remember one time I was at a WACOPS meeting. I was sitting in the back with Lee Reeves, who was their lobbyist, and he leaned over. Lee used to work for the state auditor's office before he became a lobbyist, and he leaned over to me early on in the meeting as I was getting ready to make a presentation and said, just so you know, you and I, we're the only two people in this room that aren't packing. So I always keep that in mind whenever I'm making a presentation to WACOPS.
okay, so on to number 5.
Yes. Now, the workforce retirement trends and statistics briefing, this was something that you had asked for last year as a topic to talk about a little bit this year. In specific, there were concerns about the demographics of LEOFF, the average age of members, how many members are eligible to retire now, how do some of these what does the workforce look like today, maybe compared to when you first started on the board? How much has it changed? And to what extent do these demographics create challenges for the employers and the groups? if you've got a lot of members getting closer to retirement, then you may expect a lot more pressure or interest in retirement-related topics. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan to share with you what he found.
Thanks, Steve. Members of the board, for the record, Ryan Frost, staff to the board, and this is retirement trend statistics. So as a bit of an overview, when the Great Recession hit, there was many departments had to take drastic measures, including recruitment and hiring freezes, as well as the layoffs of younger members. And both of these measures helped contribute to the average age of Left Plan 2 going up by a year and a half since 2008. And more recently, due to that, with the increased amount of baby boomers being eligible to retire, we're seeing the supply of the workforce being unable to keep up with the future demand of open positions. And I'll also go into a little bit about the number of Left Plan 2 retirements that are increasing yearly. So currently there are 17,019 active members in Left Plan 2, with 34% of the workforce is under age 40, so only a little over a third. And currently 28% of the workforce is eligible to retire. And that calculates to 4,765 members that right now today, this minute, could retire out of Left Plan 2. And that considers the age 50 early retirement as well as the age 53 normal retirement. So those are members 50 and older. So what these distributions in retirement signify is that for the first time in a long time, younger firefighters and law enforcement officers will be occupying more positions. There's also some cost to an aging membership. Older members tend to get injured more, so worker compensation claims have been predicted to spike. It also means employers are going to have to begin the process of recruiting and hiring new members, which is not cheap. So here's a bit of statistics. Number of retirees has been increasing each year during the last 14 years as plan members started to reach the 20 to 24 years of service mark. You can see in 2003 there were only 66 service retirees, and then last year, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Ryan, just a clarification. These are specific to our Left Plan 2 members, right?
Yes,
okay,
specific to us, yeah. And then in 2015, you can see the number growing to 452 service retirees. Let me go back one more. Okay, and this represents, actually, let's go to the next one. So the retiree population is growing significantly. 2003 was when the board was created, and from that point today, you see a 1,000% increase in the retiree pool. But as I mentioned earlier, the numbers could be even larger, with those 4,000 members being eligible to retire right this minute. That number could grow quickly in the years to come. So this is kind of a question. Why are members continuing to work past normal retirement age? The plan's retirement age is 53, but the average retirement age for Left Plan 2 is 56 and a half. And I think there are kind of two main reasons that's happening. The first is to extend their years of service to have a higher income replacement amount. The average hiring age for Left Plan 2 members is 29. So if you use that and the normal retirement age of 53, they'd only have 24 years of service by the time they retired. And that would calculate using the benefit calculation to only a 40% benefit in retirement. The National Institute on Retirement Security did a study, and they found that for members who are not going to receive a Social Security benefit, which many members in Left Plan 2 will not, they will need an 85% income replacement ratio in retirement in order to keep up with their current standard of living. So that means basically using that pie chart and using the 48% number from last slide, if a member worked 24 years, they'd have to find a way through savings or alternate retirement accounts to make up that other 37%. David?
Question on the Social Security. I thought that was just on the firefighter side and not on the police officer side. Is that?
Yeah.
Is it both?
About 8% of firefighters participate in Social Security, and about 54 or 56% of law enforcement officers participate in Social Security. So more of the law enforcement participate, but it's still not much more than 50-50. It's definitely less than 60%.
Yeah,
In my jurisdiction, our firefighters do not, and our officers do. So we're kind of are part of that statistic right there.
It's primarily due to county. I think almost all of the deputies are still in Social Security, and all the fire districts, I shouldn't say all, but almost none of the fire districts are in Social Security as well.
Yeah, if you average out all the members, I think it's under a third of Left Plan 2 members are actually in Social Security, if you take the entire average from all. So as I was saying, members are going to have to find a way to make up that 37% gap that they're facing through savings or other retirement accounts. So along with that reason, there's also the reason that as members get older, it shows that their salaries are getting higher. This chart shows a member at age 53, their average salary distribution at however many years of service. So if a member is age 53 with 20 years of service, that's what his average salary is. If he was to work 5 extra years, you can see that number climbing, and 10 extra years, you can see that number climbing even further. So many members are staying past 53 to boost that average salary component of the benefit calculation. And the second reason is to get closer to Medicare eligibility age. It's widely known that health care is the highest cost members are going to face in retirement. And it's even greater for public safety employees due to your earlier retirement age and the demands of your work. And so it really leaves retirees, early retirees with few options. The first one would be to apply for COBRA insurance through their employer for only up to 18 months after retiring. After that, they would have to go out on the exchange, or members could not continue their insurance with their employer and just go out on the exchange, which is I don't have an average amount on me, but it's very expensive. But we're seeing that members are continuing to work later to get close to that age because they could save thousands on future health care costs just by working those extra few years and being covered still by their employer health care rather than going out on their own and paying that full cost. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mike and then Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 28% that's eligible to retire today is including the early retirement.
The age 50, yeah.
Do we know what it is for the just normal age retirement?
I could figure that out and get that number to you, but off the top of my head, I don't know. I would say probably about. I don't want to say. I'll get the number to you.
Between 20 and 28%, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah. I just want to be accurate.
Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned the average age of Left 2 member had gone up by 1.5 years, but you didn't. I don't recall seeing what the average age was. I was just curious to know.
Yeah, sorry. It started at 42.5 in 2008, and currently it's 44.
Thank
or
you.
43.9.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right, Ryan, thank you. Mr. Neal.
The final topic for today is an educational briefing on the topic of non-left firefighters. As you'll recall, there was a bill last session. It was not a Left 2 board bill, but there was a bill last session that provided for PERS service credit for a group of EMTs that had worked for a consortium of employers that was determined ultimately not to be a PERS employer. It is very common out in the across the state right now for public employers to partner together to provide EMS services. So, for instance, you might have these consortiums that would involve a fire district and a public hospital district, and they might be funded by a county-wide levy or some kind of district levy. The payroll might be done by one organization, and the day-to-day instruction of the employers might be done by another organization, but they might be co-located in the fire stations. Those types of consortiums then, historically in the past and up till today, have created some questions then about who is the employer and do these members belong in LEOFF? But that, as you also, the board has talked about this kind of in the past with respect to public hospital districts. What Paul's going to talk to you about today, though, is a number of other areas where this issue exists that have not been discussed by the board, may not be familiar with many of you, and there was interest, I don't want to say concern, that might be too strong a word, by legislative staff last year as the one consortium bill was working through the legislative process. How many others are out there? What kind of precedent does this set? Has the LEOFF board looked at this? Whether you decide to do anything about this topic or not, the purpose of today's briefing is at least to give you an idea of all the different aspects of this broader issue that are out there. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, or the board, excuse me. For the record, my name is Paul Neal, committee staff, and as Steve pointed out, the issue here is we have some employees that are performing firefighting duties that are not included in LEOFF Plan 2. This issue has kind of grown organically over the years, and it's sort of a result of the expansion over the years of the definition of employer in LEOFF and the definition of firefighter. In the early 90s, the definition of employer in LEOFF was expanded to include port districts and higher education. That brought in people that otherwise would not have been, some people will be talking about now in this presentation are port district employees, which would not have been an issue prior to that change. Another big change was in 2005 when EMTs were added to the firefighter definition. And so that expanded the scope of who qualifies as a firefighter, and that raised some of these questions I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. Just as a quick overview, the non-LEOFF firefighters, as Steve mentioned, that includes both some groups you've talked about before and some groups you haven't. The public hospital district EMTs, the consortium EMTs, state firefighters, which is people who are firefighters that are working for state entities, airport rescue firefighters, and then volunteer and part-time firefighters. First, talking about the public hospital district EMTs, the board has had presentations on that before, so not all of you were here at that time. In a nutshell, this has kind of grown out of the extension of the definition of firefighter to include EMTs, and the question about, well, what about EMTs that work at public hospital districts? DRS made the determination that public hospital districts are districts within the meaning of the LEOFF employer definition, and therefore EMTs that work for them are in LEOFF. The public hospital districts have appealed that. There was a district in Chelan County. It's currently on appeal. I should say, DRS has made that determination that they are employers. They bifurcated the issue, so they haven't really decided whether any particular individuals are actually entitled to LEOFF yet. So it looks like, if this isn't too much inside baseball, the issue of whether these folks are districts or not is going to be decided before they get to the actual issue of making individual determinations of LEOFF membership. So that's sort of in play at this moment. But DRS has taken the position that these public hospital districts are LEOFF employers, so that EMTs working for them would be in LEOFF.
Mark? Just by chance, do you know when that is expected to happen? I mean, is there a trial date for that? Is there
the Chelan County?
Yes.
I don't know the schedule on that. I can find that out, though.
I think the notice of appeal has only been filed in the last month.
Oh.
So it's still very preliminary. The decision, the final decision by DRS was, earlier this year, March maybe, and so this is still a very much an ongoing issue.
I could guesstimate from my experience with the judicial branch that a trial would be at least a year out.
And wouldn't that happen in Thurston County? It wouldn't happen in Chelan. But that's Chelan County, that's...
If a number of hospital districts end up appealing at this point in time, it's only Chelan. perhaps that was intentional. The Hospital District Association has been handling this issue up until now, and there were more than one districts that were involved in the administrative proceeding at DRS. So it's possible that they picked one district as a kind of a lead plaintiff, if you will, to get the action filed in Chelan County rather than Thurston. I don't know what would happen if a number of other districts appealed in other judicial districts around the state, and how that would play out.
Right, yeah, I think it's one of those situations where they had some choices as to where to have the venue, and for whatever reason, they decided they wanted a venue in Chelan County.
I think I know.
One could speculate. The next group is the consortium EMTs that Steve was talking about a little bit. These are consortiums of local governments provide EMS services across jurisdictions. The one you're most familiar with, I think, probably is King County. A lot of them are funded by local jurisdiction EMS levies. There's a special statute that allows districts to do EMS levies across jurisdictions. One of the conditions of using one of those levies is that the junior taxing districts have to waive their right to a levy. They're assigning their levy right to, in most cases, the county or whatever the larger taxing district is. So they're all together in this, and the ones that I've seen tend to be, city fire departments, fire districts, and then usually a public hospital. And what has happened is that the lead agency, basically the payroll agency, does the reporting, and a lot of times, at least the situations I've looked at, the lead agency was the public hospital district, and public hospital districts, for the most part, are not in PERS. So because the public hospital district was doing the reporting, they didn't get enrolled in PERS, whereas if, say, the city had been doing the reporting, they would have been. So it's just a question about who is really the controlling employer when you have this consortium and all of the employees, who are clearly public employees, are providing services to citizens throughout the multiple districts. And as Steve mentioned, there was there are some service credit issues on that. There's past PERS service. Some consortium EMTs have been in LEOFF since EMTs were brought into LEOFF in 2005. So for some of these consortiums, the issue is about past service credit. They're in LEOFF now and have been since 2005. The bill that Steve mentioned, Senate Bill 6523, did allow employees of one consortium in Snohomish County to pick up the past service credit by paying both the employer and employee contributions without interest. As Steve mentioned, there are other consortiums out there, at least one we know of, and probably more that we don't. There's also an issue of current LEOFF credit. There's what we know about of the Skagit Valley Ambulance Authority. They've been found by DRS not to be a LEOFF employer, so they're not in. So they've got EMTs currently working who are not in LEOFF and have not been in LEOFF. So they don't have service credit in PERS or LEOFF this time. That's one issue. Then we have what I've called state firefighters. These are firefighters who are excluded from LEOFF because state agencies are not LEOFF employers, even though these folks have, for the most part, full firefighter duties. The two examples we found were DSHS currently runs a civil commitment facility at McNeil Island. The correction center was closed, but it's a civil commitment center for sex offenders is still there, so they do have firefighters on the island. They're DSHS employees, so they're not in LEOFF. The other example is a little less clear-cut. There was a case in 2015 involving UW hospitals where the court found that they were a state entity, at least for purposes of the Tort Claims Act. So whether they're a state entity for purposes of retirement system coverage has not been raised or considered yet. If they are a state entity for pension purposes, then the UW hospital employs EMTs, including medevac, which is the folks that go out in the helicopters, kind of your classic EMTs, only they're on helicopters instead of trucks, and they're not in LEOFF. It is a little strange that something calling itself the UW hospital would possibly not be a state entity. At first blush, you would think that, but they were put together as a nonprofit. And this most recent case, it was actually the UW who was saying, hey, we're a state entity, because it had to do with the Tort Claims Act and requirements of what you had to do, steps you had to go through before you could sue a state entity. So the UW hospital was going into court and saying, we're a state entity, you shouldn't be able to sue us, and the court said, you're right. So the ramifications of that are still unknown, but if they are a state entity under the Tort Claims Act, if it were to be decided they're a state entity for all purposes or for other purposes, then there would be an issue there about the coverage of their EMTs.
Paul, was there outreach there from someone, or is this just a result of the law of unintended consequences here?
Oh, you mean from the
For the UW.
Oh, as regards to the lawsuit?
I mean, did somebody from the medevac, did they contact DRS or?
This issue was specifically raised to me by legislative staff in the sense of, is this something that the board has looked at? The legislature has, for several years now, been working on the unintended consequences of a case called Dolan versus King County, where the court determined that the public defenders, which had typically not been considered county employees, that the level of control and direction provided by King County to the public defender's office had risen to the point where, for legal purposes, they were county employees, and therefore they were entitled to membership in PERS. That case is still ongoing. The UW Medical is, there's a lot of legislative concern that, to the extent that UW Medical is considered a piece of the university, that is under the extent of the direction and control of the university, to the point that it's no longer a private nonprofit, as Paul mentioned it was originally incorporated on. That creates the same kind of concern for the legislature, that there may be UW Medical employees, tens of thousands of employees that might be PERS. In particular, there would be an impact on PERS, but then there's also this piece of they employ EMTs as well that would spin over on LEOFF. And so it was more a question of, has the board looked at this? And I told them no.
Thank you.
Okay. Another example is airport rescue firefighters. These are firefighters that work for airports that have commercial flights under FAA regulations. Anytime there's a commercial flight coming into an airport, they have to have firefighters on duty from 15 minutes before the flight lands until 15 minutes after the flight takes off. If you've got a large airport like SeaTac, there's always flights coming in and taking off, so there's always firefighters in the station. Smaller airports, the status is less clear. The main case on that to date was a Bellingham firefighters case, which came out in the mid-90s. It was very fact-specific. It was kind of a balancing test about, these folks have firefighting duties, but are they full-time firefighters? The department decided that they weren't. The Court of Appeals upheld that. How that would turn out in different fact situation, a lot of the facts had to do with, well, how many flights a day are coming in, how much time are they spending in the fire station. How that would work out for particular other airports is unclear, but that's an issue. Well, there's my note. Then we have volunteer and part-time firefighters. Only full-time firefighters qualify for LEOFF, and I think originally it was a pretty clear line. You had full-time firefighters in LEOFF, and people who were volunteers were in the volunteer system. As we learned last year, at least the select committee learned last year, some volunteer firefighters are salaried. It kind of blurs that line between professional and volunteer firefighters. I think we have a presentation scheduled next month from Bridget of the volunteer firefighters, kind of explain that some more. It turns out that some LEOFF members may wish to volunteer or work part-time for another employer concurrent with their primary employment. So they're a LEOFF member working for Fire District A, and they volunteer or work part-time with Fire District B. There was a bill, sorry, that was a little early. There was a bill that passed the Senate Ways and Means last year that would have authorized members to do that, and would have prohibited collective bargaining agreements from saying they couldn't do that. That bill passed Senate Ways and Means, did not pass out of the Senate. That's kind of the status of that. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Paul. So, Steve, does that complete the actions here?
Yes, Mr. Chair, typically we'll end the meeting with a agenda item about what you want on the future agendas, but since that topic was covered under the work plan discussions, there that agenda item won't be on this month.
Okay. Anything else to come before the board before we adjourn? Okay. Without objection, we will be adjourned. Thank you, everybody.